For WHQR Public Media, this is the Newsroom. I'm Kelly Kenoyer. Thank you for joining us. It's probably no secret if you've been listening to this show a long time, but I am a planning nerd, a housing and zoning fangirl even. So it was a bit of a dream come true to drag 4 regional planners into a room last month and demand they answer all my questions. But I know it's not just me, the girl who gets excited about protected bike lanes, who cares about growth and change in the Cape Fear region. Everywhere I go in this community, residents talk to me about upcoming developments and everything they want to see in their communities. So I asked these lovely planners to come and explain what they do so that you can understand as well. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, Kirsty Dixon. I'm the planning director for Brunswick County.
So I'm Rebecca Roth. I'm the director of planning and land use for New Hanover County.
Linda Painter. I'm the director of planning and development for the city of Wilmington.
Daniel Adams, planning and community development director with Pender County.
So the reason I brought all 4 of you in here at the same time is because I think that, the Tri-County area is really what we cover here in Wilmington at WHQR. And I think Wilmington is the economic center of this region in a lot of ways. And so you all are kind of pouring traffic and all kinds of things into Wilmington. And so there's this huge regional connectivity that I think is worth talking about and discussing. And I know you all talk about that interconnectivity all the time, but I don't think that the average person gets to experience that and hear about it. So I'd kind of like to talk about some of the challenges that come along with that connectivity, with having all of those pulls in different directions. So whoever would like to jump in and start, I'd love to hear from you.
I'll start. I think that, one of the things that we look at is we see that we are dealing with a lot of commuter traffic that's coming in. We're dealing with housing challenges in terms of affordability. And we are, starting to see trends that the income of our residents is increasing. But what does that mean for our folks that work here? And that now we're having a harder time finding a place to live that's affordable as that income is rising, as housing prices are rising. Anecdotally, I think you're starting to see people who cannot afford to live in New Hanover County on that side of the river are living in Brunswick County. They're living in Pender. They're commuting longer. And that puts a strain on all of our resources as we do this.
We have seen that, the Black population is kind of leaving Wilmington. The average income is going up, which is an indication of people moving away who aren't making as much money. So have you seen in Brunswick and Pender County, are you seeing that workforce moving into your counties?
Not in Brunswick County. Brunswick County's actual income is going above, and I would say some of our rents are higher than New Hanover area. In fact, half my staff live in Wilmington.
Because it's more expensive in Brunswick County?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
I just would have anecdotal data, but it does seem like the population growth that we're seeing is not necessarily that folks are moving out of New Hanover County because they're interested in moving out of New Hanover County. It's they are having to find a development style that they're interested in at a price point that they can afford. On Linda's point, though, I think it's really interesting because here in this region, we all do face the same types of challenges, but the effects of each one is different. So City of Wilmington's talking about all the traffic that's coming in. Well, a big issue for Pender County is that everybody's leaving Pender to spend their money in Wilmington. Right, so it's kind of the same issue, but it's the ripple effect is felt across the region, but perhaps differently, or we have different things that we're trying to achieve in that sense.
Yeah, and I'll just say I think it's interesting too because the resident doesn't necessarily see any of our jurisdictions as being necessarily a different place. Yeah, I think when you get to the real southern end or western end of Brunswick County, they may consider it differently. If you get into northern Pender, they may consider it differently. But people all feel like we are one place. We are southeastern North Carolina. We are the Wilmington metropolitan area for the most part. And so it's interesting to hear that y'all have so many folks working in your offices who live in Wilmington because there are so many people who work in my office that are coming in from Pender County, Onslow County, Brunswick County. So people are also seeing these different areas as just part of the same region. Yeah, they're going where they can afford to live, but they don't feel like they're necessarily moving away.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen studies that show that a third of the workforce in New Hanover County is coming in from outside of those borders. So it's absolutely this cross-pollination, I would say. Kirsty, I'm kind of interested in talking about this. I almost think about each of these counties as different archetypes. Like New Hanover County feels like a very urban county to me, partially because it's so small and reined in by water. I feel like Brunswick County is becoming more and more suburban, especially close to Wilmington, Leland, that kind of thing. And then I think of Pender as being largely rural. So do you kind of see it that way as well?
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. I think that Brunswick County is suburban. I think the developments happening is very suburban. It's not to say that we don't have any density, and we have a lot of really great commercial hubs and coastal communities that have a density or a small town feel, but it's definitely suburban. You cannot get away from the car in Brunswick County. You have to have a car to sustain.
And the difference, I think, or one interesting point between Brunswick and Pender is Brunswick has so many municipalities. Pender has so few. So in terms of land area, there's really not that much land area that's encompassed by municipal government in Pender County as opposed to, I don't know what the land area
calculation
calculation
County has
would be,
19 towns in the county, so there's 20 jurisdictions countywide.
Yeah.
So that is really confusing for folks that live there and realtors and developers. Like, who do you go talk to about this?
That is a lot of towns.
It is.
I think historically, though, I don't think that, at least in New Hanover County, some of that differentiation was seen up until relatively recently. I remember when I first joined the staff at New Hanover County, I was saying I think that one of the biggest issues is that you have folks who feel like they should be living in a rural area and growth is encroaching there or is coming to that area, and part of that's intentional. Whenever you have all of the roads leading to one potential job center, you are trying as a planner to make sure that you're able to accommodate as many people as possible so that they're driving shorter distances. You're not pushing them out. But there are a lot of people who live in New Hanover County who feel like they chose a rural lifestyle, and that's part of the conversations I believe you're seeing right now is because what is happening when it comes to development, even though it makes sense from a planning standpoint, are not necessarily what folks anticipated or what they necessarily would have chosen for themselves.
Rebecca, that's a really interesting point, and it reminds me of a conversation that you and I had before, Daniel, about how Castle Hayne is kind of seen as a rural part of New Hanover County to New Hanover County, but some of the towns that are down that road from Castle Hayne are seen as the urbanizing sections of Pender County, and how that kind of is creating this cross-purposes kind of thing. I mean, I don't know if you view it that way, but I'd love to hear some discussion between the two of you about what that looks like.
Yeah, and we're already beginning to see development push west from Hampstead. So the Highway 17 corridor is historically been the primary residential growth area in Pender County, but it's beginning to push west, right? As land values increase, home values increase, there are more affordable options west towards Rocky Point. Rocky Point is conveniently located right there at I-40, so you can get down to Wilmington in about 20 minutes. You can also take 117 down to Wilmington through Castle Hayne. So that is an interesting perspective when you look at things regionally, that Rocky Point is sort of the next frontier in Pender County in terms of growth. And then New Hanover County, that's Castle Hayne is an area trying to preserve its rural character.
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind, and I bring this up because Daniel and I have been having conversations about this, and someone brought up, hey, but are we talking about the same things here? Because when we talk about more suburban development in Pender County, are we using the same kind of range of intensity as what we mean by suburban development in New Hanover County? The range currently in our comprehensive plan goes all the way from very low density, which stops around 3 to 6 units per acre, and we consider getting into more suburban densities around that 15 units per acre. When you're talking about the development of Rocky Point, though, it's not like you're necessarily talking about high rises and 17 units per acre. So even though it's higher density for Pender County overall, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily that different than the areas that are potentially more rural or lower density in New Hanover County.
Yeah, so what's the density of some of these Rocky Point developments?
Probably in the vicinity of 3 to 6 units an acre, right? So our future land use category medium density residential, right? So that was a great point, Rebecca. So to Pender County, medium density is 3 to 6 units an acre. That's pretty low density in New Hanover County.
In
and
Brunswick,
how we
it's
have-
very similar. Our
Right.
medium density is like 3 to 6, and 6 plus is high density. You can't even go over 13 units per acre. So
we don't even mean the same things when you
Yeah,
use the
right.
same terms
Correct.
necessarily.
So high density isn't the same.
Yeah.
And we've actually had conversations with residents about this because they say, oh, high density. But this isn't truly high density like you would think in City of Wilmington.
Interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like we essentially have a mountain and the peak is Wilmington. The highest density that's available in the region is probably within the city limits, mostly downtown.
Which makes sense because you want to focus your density in core locations. I mean that's part of it. If you look at different planning practices, that's you have your downtown, and you will typically see that decrease in scale and intensity as you go out from the downtown. The other piece for us as we look at it is putting density where it makes sense. We're looking close to services. Are you on a transit line? Things that make it easier so that because we are a city, we have wave transit. We have something Brunswick County doesn't have. And so it's that opportunity for people who want to live without a car. Can we provide that option for them? But that part of that is making sure that we're putting housing close to services where they have that option to walk or get somewhere without owning a vehicle, riding a bike.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the tremendous population growth that we're seeing in the region and how you are all trying to balance the need for more housing that we very clearly are seeing with what we're hearing very loudly from existing residents, that they want to see development slow down or stop. So how are we all balancing that?
Well, we're like first in growth, and this is our daily conversations. We get the, can we please stop growth? Can you please just deny projects moving forward? And from an educational standpoint, we can't. In the way the general statutes are set up, does it meet the minimum requirements? We are working on updating our Unified Development Ordinance to have better development, and that project's ongoing. But I think our land use plan and we need a plan for the future, and that's what we're doing. And updating our ordinances. We have really strict stormwater requirements because we know we flood. We have to know what happens and what's going to happen when we have major hurricanes. And so those are the regulations is what we've been focusing on.
And I think one of the things that's hard for us to get across to people is we're not creating this development. It's not because we are zoned this way or we have a comprehensive plan that says something that people are deciding to come here. People are coming. What we have to do is find a way to accommodate that growth and to balance those concerns about traffic, about resiliency, and all of that, and find a way to accommodate because the people are going to keep coming. And so we have to figure out how to accommodate them and understand that we are a desirable place to live. And there's something to be said for that. There are cities that are seeing their populations crater as people move out. And so what problem do you want to have? Do you want to be a place that's growing and that has new life and new vibrancy, or do you want to be that place where everyone is leaving and you're trying to figure out how do we keep going? They're coming. We now try to figure out how to accommodate that and to do it in a way that has the least impact possible.
Yeah, and big landowners, they have the right to sell their land. They have a right to develop it. And I think a lot of people don't realize they have this inherent right to do something with their property. And the minimum zoning there is what they have the right to do.
I think that's one of the things that we struggle with the most is because we have a conversation with someone, and in the same conversation, it's like housing costs are so high. How do we address that? And can we stop this growth and development? And I think, unfortunately, that's really where the crux of the matter is that the more development is limited, the more likely it is that housing costs are going to rise. Building more housing on its own doesn't solve housing affordability issues, but it has to be part of the equation. We've had conversations at the Joint City-County Workforce Housing Advisory Committee where a lot of them are trying to provide housing to the lowest of low incomes, and they said, even if I have the money to help someone, there's nowhere to put them.
I will note we're also in the process of trying to be responsive to that feedback that we're getting, right? Pender County's in the process of updating its comprehensive plan. New Hanover County is as well. I think that's a demonstration that the governments in the agency are recognizing that and trying to be responsive through thoughtful planning for future development.
You all have mentioned to me, and you've mentioned in general, that whenever you seek feedback from the community, you hear about the need for more housing that's affordable to the people who are seeking it. We never hear that in public meetings. Why do you think that is?
I think our public meetings are very focused. They're very focused on a specific project at a specific time, whereas when we're going out to do outreach on plans, and I'll use the Greater Downtown Plan, we're focused on, we started with asking people, what do you love about downtown Wilmington? What would you like to change? And so those broad questions start to allow people to come to us and say, this is what I'm feeling. I think that's part of why you're not hearing about it at meetings is they're focused very much on specific projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard too because one of the things that we've heard quite a bit is, hey, new housing is coming, new development is coming, and I see housing costs continue to rise. So I think that it's really hard to describe if this hadn't happened, what would have been the results on housing as a result? Because I don't think people are necessarily seeing that there is a link between affordability and additional housing supply. And I think that's one of the hardest pieces and one of our biggest challenges in trying to communicate that relationship.
I think that the most common misconception is these are expensive apartments going up, therefore they are increasing the price of housing. But it's really that they're showing up because housing is in high demand. And if there's not an increase in supply, then even older apartments are going to see dramatic rises in rent, which is something that we did see happening when we were seeing incredibly fast population growth in 2022. I've found tenants who had been paying $900 rent in an apartment that was built in the 70s, and then it was $1,200, and that was what the market was pushing. But that wasn't because these apartments were being built. It was because there was so much demand that there weren't enough apartments.
Correct.
In Brunswick, it's interesting, the public has really pushed for affordable housing, and so we've been successful at getting some of the larger projects that come through to include at least 5% affordable housing. And so now the same people will show up and push, and so it actually helped us add more requirements, and the developers, they really would like it approved. So they'll like, okay, fine, I'll do 5% affordable housing. So we've had like 5 projects go through with affordable housing, so we're really excited about that. So sometimes them being there and concerned about an issue, actually helps push that bar.
That was Brunswick County Planning Director Kirsty Dixon speaking alongside a panel of other regional planners from the Cape Fear region. When we come back, we'll talk about how these different regions work together to make one cohesive community, even if they work under different government bodies. Stay with us. For WHQR Public Media, this is the Newsroom. I'm Kelly Kenoyer. Thanks for listening. Today we're chatting with 4 planners from the Cape Fear region, from the city of Wilmington, and from Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover counties. Let's jump back in. What I'd like to cover next is how collaboration works with all of these different entities. Rebecca Roth from New Hanover County and Linda Painter from the city of Wilmington, you probably work the most directly with each other since one of your locations is inside of the other. But I'd love to hear what that collaboration actually looks like. Linda, could I start with you?
Sure. So we do have a joint city-county workforce housing advisory committee. Rebecca and her staff actually staff that committee, for which I am very grateful and thank her for that. But our staffs do work together on trying to address those issues. And I think the city and county have good working relationships. It's not the first issue that they have come together on. We do have conversations on a regular basis on land use. I think, as Rebecca said earlier, people think of this as one place. And I think particularly when you start looking at the city and the county, we get a lot of calls from folks who, because they have a Wilmington address, think that their property is located in the city. It's not. So, our goal is to direct them to the county to get the assistance they need. And I think that's another point where our collaboration goes back decades, and that is that the county provides our building inspection service.
Yeah, and even from a customer service standpoint, there are a lot of times Linda's office or my office will receive an email and we're having to coordinate with planners from the other jurisdiction to make sure that the resident doesn't have to try to figure out who they need to talk to, so that they know they can call one of us and they'll get to the right place. So there are the informal types of relationships that we have, the informal conversations we have on a regular basis. And then some additional more formal opportunities as well is all of the folks in this room are members of the Wilmington Metropolitan Planning Organization. And so we meet on a monthly basis at a minimum, and we also work together on their long-range plans.
I want to bring in Kirsty Dixon from Brunswick County and Daniel Adams from Pender County as well. So I'd love to kind of hear about that collaboration exactly with dealing with traffic and some of the other components where you're right on the edge and you have to collaborate and make things work.
So Brunswick County is in 3 transportation planning areas, and so we actually collaborate well with GSATS, which is in Myrtle Beach, and as well as the Wilmington MPO, and then we also have the Cape Fear RPO. And so, we have a transportation planner, and that's one of her main jobs is to go into all these different meetings. She's in multiple meetings per week to do with transportation. And that is really where, to me, the regionalism comes in, is through transportation and also hazard mitigation. It's a regional plan. But within the county, we collaborate really good with towns. If we have a project that's on the edge of a town, we will take the project to them, see what their thoughts are, and get their input.
Daniel?
Transportation planning seems to be the easiest thing to kind of point to because of those formal arrangements that we have through the WMPO. And I think that's something that is easily impactful across the region, right? So the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge is not just a Wilmington or New Hanover County or even Brunswick County issue, right? Pender County's involved in those conversations. The Hampstead Bypass is not just a Pender County issue. That's something that affects all the surrounding communities. One thing for us that's been important for us to be cognizant of as we go through the comprehensive planning process is what's going on in New Hanover County. And we talk frequently about some of the areas where the 3 counties or the counties kind of meet in 3 particular places, right? Highway 17, Rocky Point, Castle Hayne on 117, and then Highway 421 in the west side of the county. So just those informal relationships are really important, and then having the formal relationships through sitting on various committees or boards and having a regional organization where we're all involved is really beneficial.
I'd love to kind of ask this harder question. With the WMPO, you're collaborating on transportation, but counties can't build roads or maintain them. So what's it like to try and do transportation planning when you don't have that kind of direct control? And I wonder if you want to jump in here on working with NCDOT, even if you do have some power over roads, Linda.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, we as a city, we have the ability to build and maintain roads. Our flexibility is higher when it's not a state road. So we do work with NCDOT, but if you look at 3rd Street downtown, the portion of it where the utilities are underground, and you've got this stretch, that was a project where the NCDOT said, well, if you want to do that, you take it. And so that's the trade-off, is to do certain streetscape improvements. NCDOT is going to say, we will not maintain that. So then it becomes a city responsibility. And so, that's something that, our public works, our engineering, our traffic engineering departments work very closely with NCDOT. From a transportation perspective, yes, we have that flexibility, but there's also a lot of maintenance responsibilities that comes with it. And so that's the trade-off, is, in terms of our requirements and what we are expected to maintain, and also expectations that every street have sidewalks. And, we don't have the budget to go out and put sidewalks on every street that we own. And the requests are more than what we have the funding to do. So how do we prioritize that?
As for the counties, you can't build roads, so what's that like?
Yeah, it takes a lot of collaboration, and we are a stakeholder in the roads, but we have a great relationship with DOT and the Wilmington MPO and all the other planning organizations. I think that it takes that partnership. It takes me dedicating one staff member to it, so she can know what's going on countywide and talk to all the different people. She has cell phone numbers to people at DOT, but she can get hold of them, really quickly when we have a problem. And we have problems all the time when it comes to, the county approved something, but DOT said no to an access, but it's already approved. So, we have problems. We have had problems too where we wanted to require sidewalks along some roadways that are, should have sidewalks. They're more urbanized areas, but we don't have a mechanism in Brunswick County to maintain sidewalks. So if we require a sidewalk, we can require it, but then there'll be once it gets to the DOT right away, nobody will be there to maintain it. It can't be installed. So do you allow sidewalks and require them or not, even though you want them? So we don't have the mechanism to maintain sidewalks within the NCDOT right away. And so it is challenging.
Wow, that's really challenging. Daniel, you and I have talked a little bit about how you can sort of use developers to create roads because you are so reliant on NC-17, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what's it like to try and collaborate with developers in that way to make sure that there is infrastructure available that's not literally the highway?
Yeah, good question. One of the biggest challenges in Hampstead is traffic. And part of that is a result of people not being able to get from point A to point B in Hampstead without going on Highway 17. And so the county addressed that, or attempted to address it through a collector street plan, which essentially says as we've identified areas where it makes sense to have roads, and as properties develop, they're required to build a portion of the road on their site if it falls within one of these collector street areas. And it is challenging working with folks. I can describe it as a tragedy of the commons, right? Everyone kind of acknowledges that it's something that's needed. They recognize the issue. But then when it comes to an impact on their project or their land, it's not always willingness to take those types of projects on.
I think what you're alluding to with that tragedy of the commons is in the collector streets is essentially the developers are required to leave a stub so that it's possible for a road to be built. And then the tenants or the owners of the properties near that say, I don't want anybody driving on my street who's not already in my neighborhood, so they don't want it actually to be connected. And what we often see in developments across this region and probably across the U.S. is that people will say, okay, only accessible to emergency services. I want that to be coded and closed so that people can't pass through, but then they're also closing themselves off to the opportunity to not have to go on Highway 17 to go to the grocery store. How do you overcome that?
Great question. We do our best through regulatory requirements, right? We require cross-access connections on commercial developments. We require stubs to adjacent properties. There are also, in some instances, we can use the fire code to our benefit, right? Based on the number of housing units, multiple points of access are required. So generally through regulation is how we achieve those goals.
We've been successful at getting projects to have a road that does not have any driveway connections, especially major projects, 3,000 units plus, and have a main connector road through there. So everybody in the development can get out in multiple ways without a lot of driveways. It also then the developer will have the opportunity, their choice, whether they would like to dedicate it to DOT, and we're making them design it in a way that it could be dedicated to DOT.
And I'll just piggyback on that, Christy. I think that one of the things that we see as an opportunity in New Hanover County that I think has really benefited Brunswick County is that when you have a project that is larger, where there's master planning of a larger site, there's more opportunities to work to have a developer put this in. The real difficulty arises when you don't have necessarily a capital budget or any type of funding source to help with roadway infrastructure when you have smaller parcels, because we have those in New Hanover County along with some of the bigger parcels. I think one of the things that you have instead, though, are the concerns where people are hearing a larger number of units and, hey, that might be built out over, a decade or two, but the numbers are really scary. The impact is really scary, but in the end, you'd much rather have a development that is developed in a unified way as opposed to piecemeal development. And trying to strike that balance and really communicate those benefits to the public is difficult.
This is a conversation that our staff has every month because we have to be really careful not to tip it so they start piecemealing. I know people hate the large projects, but a lot of them have 30-year build-out time. And so infrastructure and roads will change over time. It will not look like the same landscape today than it does, 30 years from now. And so things have time to change and contract and be fixed. But time, all the units were there.
That was Kirsty Dixon from Brunswick County. We'll be right back. For WHQR Public Media, this is the Newsroom. I'm Kelly Kenoyer. Thanks for listening. Today we're chatting with 4 planners from the Cape Fear region, from the city of Wilmington and from Pender, Brunswick, and New Hanover counties. We're finally on to my favorite topic, bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Let's jump back in. What I'd like to get to next is this issue we brought up earlier, which is the cycling and pedestrian activity that a lot of folks really want to support in the Cape Fear region. The Wilmington Metropolitan Planning Organization has put together plans trying to incentivize this, but it is extremely challenging in a lot of these regions because we live in a very car-based culture. So I think I'd like to start with the city of Wilmington, if you, Linda Painter, wouldn't mind kind of kicking it off and explaining how the city has tried to develop cycling and pedestrian facilities.
I think you provided part of that, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So the WMPO for a long time, and today still is, probably the primary transportation planner for the city of Wilmington. And so they have done various plans at both a city level and a regional level. So we have, I think 2013 was the Greenway Plan that covers both the city and New Hanover County. In 2023, we did an updated Walk Wilmington plan, and that really focuses primarily a lot on safety. So it looked at what are some of the least safe intersections and sections of roadway in the city and what can we do to improve safety. And that's everything from putting in stop bars to crosswalks. So it's not just adding new pedestrian and bicycle paths, but identifying how can we make the ones that we have safer. We also work with them on larger projects, so the downtown trail. That's something that they have been helping us with through the conceptual phase as well as the design phase. So they help us to advance those projects. At the same time, we do have, because of that, the desire for this is so strong in the city, we have regulations, and this goes back to our previous discussion about the benefit of being able to own and maintain streets. But if you're developing in the city, and there's no sidewalk along your property, you are required to install that. If it is on a planned greenway, you actually have to put the greenway cross-section in. It's not the sidewalk. You're going to do that wider multi-use path. So those are some of the options that we have and how we like to try and do this incrementally, because it's not something we can do all at once. And yes, we have gaps, and that's what we hear about a lot is, I don't understand, there's a sidewalk here, but there's this long gap, or why did I have to put sidewalk in when there's no sidewalk on either side of me? Because it's going to come eventually, and this is how we build it out. That's how we approach it. So it's both planning for the future in terms of the large projects, as well as looking at that incremental growth. And then we have an internal committee that helps to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian improvements based on various metrics.
Rebecca Roth, I'd love to have you jump in here and talk about how New Hanover County supplements these efforts or adds its own. I know that there are greenways that kind of go from the city into the county. So what does that look like on your end?
The way that planning and development has generally been looked at for unincorporated areas is that folks have lower taxes, so they're not going to be receiving necessarily municipal or urban levels of services. Regardless of if you're in an incorporated area, a municipality, a city or town, there are some services that they receive that folks in the unincorporated areas also want to receive, and that could be of a community benefit. So New Hanover County, it is very collaborative in order to put bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in place. And our strategy working together has been to really identify the main lines along some of our major roadways. Because the county doesn't own or maintain roads, those are all in NCDOT right-of-way, and NCDOT does not maintain bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, as Kirsty mentioned, and so the county has decided, well, we're going to pay for it. So we pay to install the infrastructure, and we pay to maintain it, even though it's technically within NCDOT's right-of-way.
And this is something that residents are demanding or asking for.
Correct. And we're really looking at how do we extend on the networks that are already in place in the city of Wilmington, so that right now you can pretty much start in the Ogden area and ride your bike all the way to Wrightsville Beach. We've got new sidewalks and multi-use trails planned to connect into all the way up to Porter's Neck, the Walmart, plans for the North Chase area, and then also in the southern part of the county as well. Now comes the funding, and then all of the hard work of actually designing and constructing it.
I personally can't wait because I am a cyclist. I'd love to bring in Kirsty Dixon from Brunswick County and Daniel Adams from Pender County. When I first moved to Wilmington, I'm a cyclist commuter. I didn't want to have to drive to work. So I was looking for different places where I could live. And I tried to look in Leland, and I just set into Google Maps, okay, how long would it take for me to bike from Leland to Wilmington, not knowing anything about the region? I'm willing to bike 5 miles one direction for my commute. And it said I had to go all the way through Pender County. I could not legally cross either of the bridges between Brunswick and New Hanover counties. And so it would have been 60 miles or something for my bike ride, and I decided not to live in Leland for that reason. So I'd really like to hear you both kind of talk about the challenges with pedestrian and cycling infrastructure in these regions that are a little bit more spread out and where you would have to have a lot of miles of paved infrastructure to serve really small populations relative to that distance, and also the challenge of connectivity across counties. So either one of you.
Well, we have a trail plan. It's called More Than a Trail. It was adopted in 2016, but it's still very active, and it shows interconnections. And a lot of those interconnections are on more rural roads because we acknowledge that we cannot build, in all those areas. So let's get the traffic off of the main roads onto more rural roads that you would be comfortable bicycling. And so that was a great project. A lot of the infrastructure that we've seen for sidewalks and bike trails and stuff have actually been within the towns. Belleville has a great one it's under construction right now that will interconnect to their park and to a school. Leland has a big sidewalk near school, a lot of them near schools. So I really think the infrastructure is there, but it goes back to this mechanism that we don't have to own and maintain them. And DOT would allow us in the right of way to own and maintain them, but we don't have that mechanism. It would be our Parks and Rec department, but we really don't have that mechanism or maybe the desire to own and maintain them yet. But we do have plans. And when a new project comes, we require them to set aside an easement showing where that's going to be. So we are planning for the future, even though we're not doing it right now.
Interesting. Daniel?
Sort of similar to what Kirsty described. So we have a bicycle and pedestrian plan that was adopted in the past couple of years, and it identifies areas where the community has indicated they would like to see bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And that plan was actually developed in conjunction with the WMPO. So it really only encompasses the more metropolitan or urban area of the county. And the challenge for us is the practical application of that plan. So I think we can all acknowledge, yes, it makes sense to have bike ped infrastructure in these areas, but when we don't necessarily have control over the roadway or the right-of-way, we now have to rely on DOT as a partner to help us get this infrastructure installed. And so we do something similar when we have the ability to place conditions of approval on a project, and it's adjacent to where bike ped infrastructure is called for in the plan. We require that they set aside an easement. We do not have any funding mechanism set up right now. That's something that has been a big point of emphasis for the folks, especially in Hampstead, access to the amenities that are traditionally in more urban or incorporated areas.
I want to add that in Brunswick County, the Wilmington MPO helped find a grant to do a Gullah Geechee corridor, which will be a greenway, and that plan is on the back end of it, so there's already plans, it's online, and it will be really cool, and it will go from Navassa all the way down to our Brunswick Nature Park, and we hope to get it funded a lot through DOT.
This is such a challenging issue with the modern American development pattern where things are so spread out. And I think that given what we've discussed earlier about the need for more housing, the fact that many more affordable new developments are further flung from the city center. I recently read a study that came out of UNC Chapel Hill and AAA that was talking about how most deadly pedestrian-involved crashes are far away from city centers. And it's It's because there are folks trying to cross arterial roads where there aren't pedestrian and cycling infrastructure available. And that's really challenging because this is where it's more affordable because there's less amenities. And yet that's also putting people who might not have access to cars in more dangerous situations. And I know you all can't solve the issue of American poverty, but I thought I would point that out.
Well, I was going to say, I think, and this came up during the MTP, that, when you look at 17 through Leland, it's designed to reduce vehicle crashes. But the number of people I see standing on those center medians that are stranded because they are trying to get from one shopping center to another is scary. And I get the design, I get why it's designed that way, but it is so unfriendly to bicyclists and pedestrians and people who are just trying to go from Walmart to Harris Teeter or something else. And you've lined that with, and there's a lot of new multifamily going in there. So you have all of these services in multifamily, but there's literally no way for someone to safely cross that road.
I'd love to ask you all if there are specific challenges that you have because of state laws and regulations that you might want to see changed, that you would highlight for your legislators.
So I'll get this one started. I think the hard thing is that a lot of the statutes that we operate under, they are either requiring us to do things or saying that we cannot do things. I think one of the types of authorities that we like to see in the general statutes is when we have the ability to do something if it makes sense for our local jurisdiction. So the big focus right now is on the legislation that passed in December as part of Senate Bill 382 that limited local authority to basically be able to change any of our regulations that might impact properties in ways that would reduce some of the permissions that they already have in place. This is very different from what we have had as our local authority for years and years and years and years, and we're still wrapping our heads around a little bit as to what even the implications might be in our ability to achieve some of the goals of our plans. Because really, we don't like to lean completely on regulatory authority, but regulations and money are really the two biggest ways where we can achieve the goals that we have for planning for our communities. And we are very happy that our local elected delegates to the General Assembly, from everything that we've heard, are supportive of a repeal of those provisions. But at this point in time, we don't really know when that might happen, what exactly that might look like. But I think that is one area where it's pretty common ground that we'd like to see a change.
Let me just give an example of what that would look like. So right now, Eagles Island has a section that's zoned heavy industrial, right? So under this new provision, you as a county are no longer allowed to say, I don't think it's appropriate for us to build a giant factory across from downtown Wilmington, so we're going to say that's no longer permitted. That's one of the highest uses that's typically considered for any kind of land. So you can't now say this is no longer permitted. Anybody could go in and drop in and build a factory there. I mean, they could have anyway because that zoning hasn't been changed, but now you can't take that off the table. Correct?
Correct.
One of the biggest challenges that we have, and we held 3 community meetings for our Unified Development Ordinance. 50% of those comments had to do with Brunswick County needs a tree ordinance. And New Hanover County and all the towns that have special legislation to do so, and Brunswick County does not. The county has officially requested the state legislator to please let us have that authority, but we have not heard back. And again, that's what the public wants. They would love to see a tree ordinance, and the staff would love it, but it's not something that we can do. And again, 50% of the comments had to do with tree ordinances. They want us to protect trees and mitigate them if they are taken down, and that's something we just not are allowed under the current general statutes.
That is a common issue across the region, even for those of us that do have tree ordinances and mitigation requirements, is the feeling that we are not doing enough to protect trees. We did a presentation, city and county, to the Alliance for Cape Fear Trees, and I had 2 questions after that presentation. Both of them were like, how do we get rid of by right zoning? And that was the question. Again, it goes back to those development pressures. It's not just traffic, it's trees. And that's what people see. They're seeing all of the trees coming down saying, why don't you stop it?
It's their viewscape. Every time they leave their house, they have a viewscape. And when that changes, it changes their environment for them. And it changes where they thought they moved to. They thought they moved to a place that had lots of trees because there was trees on the road. And so that's why we're trying to propose, as long as Senate Bill 382 is repealed, to have larger buffers to push development back off the roads and have more trees along the road. So you can't see people grilling in their backyard, and you can, see the trees instead, because I think that will help people feel more comfortable with development, that, it's back there, but they don't have to interact with it. They're still seeing their trees.
So it was 382 that stopped you from being able to institute that?
Yes.
We're not even exactly sure how some of the new language would apply to some of our provisions.
It really sticks the existing zoning to where it is, so you can't grow. You can't change. And we need to continuously change with what's going on in the world. And so if you're stuck with what you had for the last 10 years moving forward, that's a big problem.
I think the other piece for us was that it didn't become effective at the time of adoption. It was effective 6 months prior. And so, our attorney said, hey, what have we changed in the code since June that we now have to go back that may not be legal because this requirement changed to require that all property owners agree? I think it was that double whammy of we're not really sure what it means, but oh, by the way, it also goes back 6 months prior to the adoption of the bill.
I'd like to kind of wrap up this conversation by asking all of you to share, as planners, since you're always thinking about the future of your communities, what you're excited about for the future of the Cape Fear region.
So we received some good news yesterday. We had applied this past summer for our first CDBG infrastructure grant in a while. This is a federal grant source to help with infrastructure costs that's administered through the state. And we were approved for almost $3 million to support a new water line in the Scotts Hill area. As I mentioned previously, right now, developers pay for extensions to water and sewer in most cases. And so sometimes existing neighborhoods may have public water available just on either side, but folks can't tap in. And this is a community that's been hoping to get some help for a while. They've been experiencing issues with their private wells, and we actually have a mechanism now that we might be able to help.
Kirsty?
Brunswick County's reverse osmosis plant should come online in the late spring. So, I think that's really exciting and will provide better water quality. We've recently adopted a wellhead protection zoning overlay before Senate Bill 382. And so it's still valid. We are also looking at adding some more performance standards in that area. So, water quality and saving water quality is really important for the future. So I'm excited that we're able to take some of those steps.
Daniel?
Organizationally, Pender County is investing a lot of money in capital improvements right now. So I think over the next 5 years, we're going to have a new library in Hampstead, new Health and Human Services building, new law enforcement center. We're working on design for a new water treatment facility. So the Hampstead bypass is under construction. There's just a lot of growth and change in Pender County and a lot of investment from the county. So I'm really excited to see that.
Very cool. And Linda?
I'm excited because after about 18 months of public input, our Greater Downtown Plan is going to be coming out in draft form to the public in a couple of months. And it's just really been interesting to see the interest and the engagement. This is such a changing region, but the people who have participated in this, some have lived here forever, some have just moved here, but the energy that we have seen and, at various pop-up events when people stop by, oh, what are you doing here? Like, we're doing this, and give them a pom-pom and let them vote, and they're all in, and they take it seriously. And I've seen kids, like, if you explain to kids what the options are, I watch them, like, they thought of it. It's like, okay, this is what's important to me. It didn't matter what age. And so that excites me to see a plan that's really being driven by the community in terms of telling us what their priorities are, what they want to see, and then as we take that and then move into update that approach and see how we can adjust it to do our comprehensive plan update, because I think that a lot has changed since 2016.
Well, I want to thank all of you for spending some time with me this afternoon and really digging in on development and the future of this entire region. So thank you for taking the time and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's about all the time we have left for the newsroom. Thank you for listening to our panel of planners from the Cape Fear region. Linda Painter from the city of Wilmington, Rebecca Roth from New Hanover County, Kirsty Dixon from Brunswick County, and Daniel Adams from Pender County. Thanks also to my editor, Ben Schachman, and programming manager, Ken Campbell. If you have questions about today's programming or ideas for a future show, you can email us at newsroom@whqr.org. If you missed any part of this show, you can find it at whqr.org, and you can get this show as a podcast pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts. I'm Kelly Kenoyer. Thanks again for listening to the Newsroom from WHQR Public Media.